All right, Reed. So I think chipping, when you live in the Northeast like we do, but really anywhere that has an off season, that's one of the hardest things to like come back sharp with after an off season. It becomes a priority about getting that in shape when the season does roll around.
Yeah, and sadly, if you're rusty, you can lose so many strokes.
Oh my gosh, just so many blown up and downs, frustrations, and you're going to miss a few greens too. So it becomes a big priority, I guess is what I'm trying to say when the season rolls around.
Right.
So we talked about this and we said, really, for the rest of us, amateur golfers, I guess, there are 3 chips that we need to get good at and get practicing as soon as the season does roll around.
To simplify how you can kind of go into the season and sharpen up, most amateurs, I'm not sure that they're kind of aware, but there's at least 3 main basic shots in chipping, short game, pitching. You kind of have your standard shot, which, at least for me, the way that I've always done it, I usually have this shot probably 70% of the time. This is your standard kind of, the ball is slightly back, you weight on the front foot, and you forward lean that shaft, and it's more of a bump and run type shot, right?
Yeah.
This is not where you're like lofting it way up. You can set up with the weight on your front foot. And when it comes to that sort of a chip shot, you just want to focus on contact. Contact and stability. I would say that that's the most important thing. You can only practice this inside if you actually have space in your house to actually to be able to hit a shot. But you can go up against the wall, and that is the way, because you're going to forward lean that shaft and you're going to have a descending blow. You want to get the weight on your left foot, and you just want to make sure that ball's slightly back in your stance and just consistently strike that golf ball.
And so this is kind of your stock standard. You're going to hit this chip more often than any other chip. Right? That this is your bread and butter. And so it's really important to just get good at the basic motion of doing this.
Right.
Which is what you're saying is, and 1,000 coaches will say this, that basically you move the ball slightly back, you lean the shaft slightly forward, and you put your weight slightly forward.
Right.
And then from there, it's basically like a putting motion with your arms and shoulders, right? And just kind of sort of tilting them along.
I mean, you start to get into kind of like chipping theory. There are some guys that don't want you to use as much wrist, and you kind of like the Gary players of the world, they definitely use the wrist. And so we don't even need to, the most important, get comfortable doing a descending blow. Make sure that ball's back in your stance and your weight is on your front foot and it's stable. You don't need to hit this hard. This isn't a 60-yard pitch shot. This is one of those shots where the ball is carrying 20 feet and it's going to roll out an additional 10 or 12 feet, and these are those shots that you can do with a sand wedge, or you could potentially do it with a pitching wedge or a 9-iron or an 8-iron. And so whether you use your wrists or shoulders, it starts to just do something that is comfortable for you to make sure that you're actually getting a solid strike and that it's a descending strike. And the reason I keep saying that is because they're not all wedge shots and not all shots around the green are the same. And that kind of gets into the other shot that you're going to need to have, which is a more lofted shot. And 2 massive things change when you're dealing with a lofted shot. You have to open up the club face, right? Which means you're going to have to open your stance. You are not going to have weight nearly as far forward. And you're going to have to lower, because you open the club face, you're then going to have to lower your shaft angle, and you're not going to have a descending blow. So it's a very, very different shot than your actual kind of bump and run standard shot you would hit from the fairway. But if you're going to go over a bunker, you're not going to be able to do the punch and run. So you need this shot.
You basically need to know how to hit it. High around the greens, low around the greens, and then have a stock shot around the greens.
Right.
The high shot is exactly what you're saying. You open the face slightly, and then you have the shaft a little more neutral at setup rather than too far forward, right? And in doing that, that's going to help bring the ball flight up, and that's going to be really important when you've short-sided yourself, you're coming out of the rough, all sorts of things. So this is kind of your second priority, to like hit some shots doing that and nailing the setup for that, which is so important.
Intuitively, you probably would naturally do this, but especially for very high handicaps, they might not know to do this, but your shaft is also going to lower a little bit. When you open that club face, the shaft angle is actually going to lower, so your hands are going to have to get a little bit lower to be able to get that correct strike on the golf ball when you're doing the flop shot.
Exactly. But again, not one many coaches would say should be your first go-to. Like, it's kind of if necessary, pull the fire alarm on the
Yeah,
flip
I would say that you use this shot probably about like 15% of the time, around the green. But if you have one of those shots where you're kind of in thicker rough, you need to carry the ball 20 feet and you only have about 5 feet of rollout, that's something that you can't do the bump and run. And in fact, doing a bump and run, kind of forward lean shot when you have really bad lies or out of the bunker, it doesn't work because it will dig so hard in the bunker. So a lot of the times you need to have more of that open face and come in with a more neutral shaft angle when it comes to these higher trajectory shots.
So then there's the third shot that brings us to. So which one's that you think the rest of us should be spending time doing?
Well, yeah, if you have a really bad lie or if it's a heavy bunker shot, you do need to kind of, and this is where I would say, you kind of have your bump and run, you have your standard high shot, and then go drop a couple balls in some bad lies and get used to just kind of like thudding the ball out where it's bad enough to where your club face will not make impact with this golf ball. And especially in the Northeast, in fescue rough, this will happen. So if you don't practice it and then you go out and play, the course is going to force you to practice it. So you might as well get a couple reps in before you actually start playing. And this is more of a thud shot where you are not going to hit the golf ball. You're going to hit the grass around the golf ball and just kind of plop the golf ball out of its lie. Practicing that is going to be really vital, and it'll save you strokes because if you get good at that, you won't lose nearly as much.
These are the shots where your ball's in greenside rough, it's in fescue. If you're in the Southeast, it's those shots where the Bermudas just completely
it's like up and then drops.
Yeah, it's just dropped in the middle of all this nasty grass, right? So the goal here is to basically get your ball out of trouble somewhere on the green. You shouldn't be aiming at pins with this shot, but you should get used to just knowing how to chop the ball out of this thick stuff and just to kind of get it rolling along the ground onto sort of a safe spot onto the green, right?
And this is why it's so vital to practice this shot, because that ball is going to come out with no spin. The trajectory that it comes out is going to be more inconsistent. And so just, before the new season, when you haven't played very many rounds, it's so vital to try to get 20 or 30 of these shots in, and it'll save you strokes immediately because high handicappers just lose just so many shots when it comes to these sorts of scenarios.
We've talked about a few different shots here, but then like when we talk about actually like how to practice them, you don't necessarily need to spend a whole bunch of time doing it. Like, if you spend 15 minutes during your warm-up, or even like at a practice session at the beginning of the season, that can go a long way with this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I just want it to be sprinkled in there. The majority of what you should be practicing is that original bump and run shot. You're going to use that the most. That'll actually lead to your ups and downs. And just make sure that, if you have a decent enough lie, you can put that ball in the back of your stance and make a good strike. But you are going to encounter these horrible scenarios on the golf course. So not going and hitting at least a couple every single time or before you start your season, it'll definitely hurt you if you don't practice it a little bit.
Golf Digest number one teaching pro, Butch Harmon, and a bunch of pros will say that one way they practice that bump and run shot is they'll put a few golf balls sort of on the grass around the green, and then they'll step off a few yards and put, say, like a towel on the ground of the green. And their goal is to try to land their ball as close to the towel as possible, but like just past it, you know, just so they can practice like dialing in how large their swing should be and how far their ball's carrying, just to give themselves a feel of like, oh, this swing equals 10 yards of carry, this swing equals 5 yards of carry, and really trying to dial in their landing spot on these chips. It's like a popular thing that pros do.
No, absolutely. Especially if you can get out to a golf course, practicing distance control on these shots is vital, especially carry distance, focusing on where it's landing, not as much about where it's ending up, because when you're on the golf course, that's what you care about. Okay, I need to carry the bunker, or I need to get over this slope.
Yeah.
And so, that towel will force you to hyper focus on exactly where you're landing that golf ball.
Yeah, and again, these chips can be really finicky, which is why that, I don't know, for me and, for a bunch of other amateur golfers, it should be pretty high on your priority list when the time does come to get cracking on the season.
Exactly. So as the season kind of comes in here, make sure not to forget about these 3 basic shots that you're going to need if you're going to have a good golf season this year.